Before we get started with today's podcast, we'd like to ask returning listeners to leave us a rating or review on your favorite podcast platform, iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you really enjoy it, share a link to this podcast with friends or family who would enjoy hearing our weekly discussions about basketball and basketball culture. Now, on to the show.
Yeah, isn't it amazing when Michigan can keep this game to a 19-foot, 9-inch game inside that three-point line? It's all there. Nice move by Steve Fisher here. Turn it into the 19-9 game.
Welcome to the 19-9 podcast. On today's episode, I've got regular guest Jason Andreas here with me today. We're going to be talking about following up on his travels abroad. If you haven't already listened to that episode, you should go back and listen to his years abroad, just talking about playing overseas. But today we're going to finish that conversation talking about whether we should be paying college players. And I think that the zeitgeist on this has really changed and people are feeling like we should, but there is a more nuanced discussion and I wanted to get someone who's actually lived it in here to talk with me about it. So welcome to the 19-9 podcast, Jason.
Hey, Aaron, thanks for having me, man. This is like my fourth time on. I guess I must be having a good time if I keep coming back. So thank you.
I had to switch it to regular guest. I lost count. I couldn't remember how many times it was. So you're just a regular guest now.
3, 4. Yeah, thank you. I've hit that regular status. I always wanted to be a regular, like at a bar where I come in and they have my drink ready for me. Yes. So maybe I'm getting there in the podcast.
Sure,
so
for
thank
sure.
you.
You're on your way.
And we've got it's beautiful fall time here in Michigan. We've got the leaves are changing. You got pumpkin spice lattes everywhere. Sports are rolling along. So yeah, things are good.
Yeah. What have you been watching lately?
Well, goes without saying, NBA playoffs. We obviously talk basketball here.
Yeah.
I'm eagerly waiting to see what happens with the college season, but I've been adapting to the NBA game and really been watching that. I love where things are at. I've sat down and focused in and watched all 4 finals games so far, which has been really great. I think the basketball's been really interesting. I think it's been good. It's been competitive. I thought the Lakers would sweep in 4. I'm not saying I'm a fan either way or that's who I wanted to win. I'm just saying I didn't think the Heat would be able to stop both AD and LeBron. Most people can't. And I just didn't think the Heat had the personnel to do so. I love the way the Heat play. I love how young and energetic they are. I like Jimmy Butler. I like all those guys. And I think Spoelstra is an amazing coach. I just didn't think they could match up. So the fact that they took 1 away, I think is impressive. They might even snag 1 more, but I still think the Lakers are probably going to take it in 5 or 6 games.
Who you got on Friday then? Who put it out there?
I mean, well, if I think that he can get 1 more, I guess
it's got to be Friday, right?
I'm saying they're going to win the next one. Otherwise, I'm wrong. So yeah, I told my buddies up front. I said, it's either going to be a sweep or I think the Heat are going to win 2 games. So I said either 4 or 6 games. So I guess now we're up to 6 games. So I'll say the Heat will win the next game, then the Lakers will close off in 6. That's going to be my call, but I'll probably be wrong. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I think it's over. I think.
Probably. You're probably. If it's a betting man, I bet on you, not me.
Yeah, I like the Heat. I really thought before the series they might give them like 6 or even like go to 7 incredibly, but they've just been playing so well. But I just think with Bam injured and they're so young and without Dragic, I think he was just underrated in the whole playoffs. He was awesome, and to lose him before the series started, and you got him like kind of hanging out there now, like he was going to warm up. I think that's almost worse, when a guy maybe can play, because then you're hoping like, oh, we're going to have Goran back, and then he doesn't play, and you just have that deflated feeling like we just can't beat these guys. Like I just think AD and LeBron are just too good for them.
Well, you know what I think is interesting about the Heat? I think you're spot on there, but I think the Heat is an interesting team. They're almost the opposite of the Warriors and the Lakers who have grabbed older, more mature superstars and tried to build these kind of quote unquote dream teams. The Heat really kind of did it with Youth. They did it with shooters. They did it with youth. They did it with kind of technical skills. And I think it's been really interesting watching how they've rebuilt the team over the past couple of years. It's similar, obviously, in nature of building a squad, but I think they've just done it a little bit differently. And a lot of guys who you probably didn't know their name 2 or 3 years ago, now they're in the NBA Finals making a name for themselves. So
yeah, they're kind of classic really for that, right? They're for developing their players. That's kind of a classic Heat culture thing.
Absolutely. This is not a new take on what the Heat have done by any means.
Yeah.
This is not a hot take, but it's nice to see that happen. I think a lot of sports fans love a good underdog story, and I guess I'm calling the Heat an underdog despite the fact they had a great year. But yeah, I'd say an underdog compared to the Lakers or other kind of these super built teams like the Rockets, et cetera, that have kind of been built off of really strong players, Hall of Fame type guys. So yeah, it's been a fun watch so far.
I heard this one the other day. I'm curious what your take would be. Jimmy Butler or James Harden? Who would you take?
I'm taking Butler all day. I know Harden's a stat guy. If you love stats, you can't pass up Harden. But if you're building a team, I got to take Butler. I'm a team guy. I've never been a huge Harden fan. I respect him. I like to watch some of his highlights, but I also get equally frustrated with watching him, and his Olay defense and kind of laziness when it comes to the other side of the floor. So I like Butler because he's well-rounded. He's got that aggressive attitude on both sides of the floor. He plays hard. He brings guys along with him where I couldn't necessarily say all those things with Harden. I like Harden. He's a great guy to watch. He's a lot of fun, but if I had to build a team, I would go with Butler.
I think that's one of those just like picks on the way about the way says a lot about the way you like to play basketball, what you like to watch on the basketball
100%,
court. I think that's a lot of it.
Yeah, if I was a guard and a scorer, maybe I'd pick Harden. But I'm a both ends. I'm a defensive first kind of guy, and I like the way that Butler plays. He's a little more tough nosed, a little more hard nosed basketball overall. So yeah, I don't know. Good question. I'm probably wrong yet again. That's probably the wrong choice. Most people would probably pick Harden and probably would be successful, but I do like Butler's game, so I'll have to lean on Butler for sure.
I like it. So you said you were, before we started too, you're into Formula One racing. Is that true?
Yeah, it is. I've been watching it for a couple years. This was not a new pickup during quarantine. I've actually been watching for a few years.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, I mentioned on a couple previous conversations that we've had, podcasts that we've done, that I grew up in the Cleveland, Ohio area, and historically sports in Cleveland have not been fantastic with the Indians and the Browns and the Cavs, although the Cavs won the championship in 2016, which literally brought tears to my eyes. It was fantastic. And the Indians have had some success as well in terms of reaching World Series and things like that. But yeah, I was like, man, I need to pick up another sport outside of the core three. And I never was a huge hockey fan, just because we never had hockey in Ohio. So I was like, is there anything else I can run with? And I don't know, for some reason, I got into Formula One racing, and I didn't really know a whole lot about it. And this is interesting. It ties back into me kind of chasing losing teams for all my career. I started looking into Formula One, and I said, all right, I don't know. I don't really know much about these guys. Each race car driver in Formula One has a number on their car.
Yeah.
I was number 44 when I played in high school and college. And so I said, all right, I'll just pick this guy. There's a guy, he races for Mercedes. His name's Lewis Hamilton. He's got number 44. I don't know anything about him.
Yeah.
And he turns out to be one of the best drivers in the history of the sport. He's breaking all these records now that Michael Schumacher and all these legends have broken. So I think I picked very luckily, but it also makes it a lot of fun. I actually can sit down and watch a sport where my team or my guy actually wins on a regular basis. I'm not used to this.
Yeah, it's like the NCAA tournament when you have no idea who the teams are. Just it's better to not look stuff up on them. Just pick at random, and then it's more exciting when they win. You're like, wow, I got it.
Exactly. Yeah. And I can honestly claim this was not, let me do my research and see who the best racer is, and then I'll be a fan of his so I can actually follow something that wins. It makes me laugh because I literally picked it out of the blue, well, using the number system that I mentioned, and he happened to be the best. So it's a lot of fun. I get up early on Sunday mornings. I grab a coffee and I'll sit there. It's usually 8 or 9 a.m. start on Sundays, and I'll watch the races. And they're always in some beautiful exotic location, which during quarantine has been nice too.
Yeah, you're like, well, it'd be nice to be there. Yeah. Morocco.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Exactly. Yeah. It's a bit of an escapism within sports, which is a nice added benefit as well.
Let's get into the main topic today, because this one I think will be good. And I think it's one that the knee-jerk reaction is always, I even wrote down, most everyone says, yes, it's a great idea. And then I did ... But I just think there is a lot more nuance. So I don't know where you want to start. I kind of want to hear just maybe your opinion, and then we can get into why or what the problems are with paying college athletes, because again, I think that the banner right now would be pay them. That's sort of what everyone thinks or says right now.
Yeah, well, I love this conversation, but I also hate it because I like finite things, right? I'm a logical thinker, and I love to be able to come to a conclusion where I'm like, yep, that's the absolute right answer. Let's proceed. There is none of that with this conversation, in my opinion. And I think a lot of people would agree with that. Although, as you were mentioning, Aaron, over time, over the past, let's say 10, 15 years, I feel like there has been a sway in public perception and public opinion that probably something needs to be done. And something needs to happen where there is some sort of compensation or something needs to change. That's the boat that I'm in. But how you actually define that is a really, really difficult conversation, because you start to look at things like, of course, the core ones, right? Revenue generating sport versus non-revenue generating sport. Typically, the larger universities are going to have two, possibly, if they're lucky, 3 revenue generating sports. You start getting into the mid majors and the smaller tier sports, they don't have any revenue generating sports. You start looking at, the conversation of men's sports versus women's sports, right? None of the women's sports are revenue generating in 98, 99% of the universities until you get into, some of the big UConn women's basketball or Tennessee women's basketball.
Right.
And so how do you balance all of that out? That's where
it just starts to unravel. And I think you can see it in a microcosm already with the COVID stuff, right? Because these big universities can have a robust testing program, and they can do all this, isolating, and, they got everything at their disposal. And then if you're a smaller school, you really have to make decisions like this could be, do we shut these sports down for the year? What does that mean? And I think this is just that on blown out to an even bigger proportion, right? Because I don't even know. But I guess, do you think, the hardest thing for me to start out with is that the kind of classic argument against it is that, well, the athletes already are compensated. So I know it's a little different when you were there, but what I don't even know where to start with it. Do you feel like that's enough, or is there at least a portion of athletes who are left out of certain things, certain parts of the college experience, if they aren't compensated for the time and effort that they're putting in?
Again, I mean, that's where I tend to start the conversation, but it's not straightforward either, because you've got big differences in the impact of what a major university, a major conference football player goes through versus maybe somebody who's on the crew or rowing team, or maybe somebody who's on the golf team, right? Or somebody who's on, the volleyball team, right? There's different impacts and also time commitments to what actually has to take place between those different sports. And again, a lot of that goes back to revenue generation and success and all of these different things. So it's not a clear-cut answer when it comes to that either. I sometimes use this anecdote, and this is a true story. This is not just something made up, but when I was at Michigan State, I was absolutely fortunate enough to have a full athletic scholarship, right? That covered 5 years, books, room, board, all of that great stuff. Fantastic. I mean, I don't know what that equated to at the time, but we're talking probably 6 figures worth of value in today's day and age. I mean, that's incredible. What an amazing, fantastic thing. And I'm very, very fortunate and appreciative of that. I also had a very good friend at Michigan State who had a full academic scholarship. Now, he also, this was not, here's your academic scholarship, have fun for the next 4 years and do whatever you want. He also had a lot of pressure on him to maintain his scholarship through good grades, just like we had a lot of pressure on us as athletes to maintain our scholarship through playing well. and getting good grades as well. Because not only did we have to perform on whatever court or field it is that we were playing on, but we also had to maintain at least fairly good grades to stay eligible, all of that good stuff as well. I think the difference, though, is time commitment. Now, my friend who was on academic scholarship, he studied all the time. We also studied all the time to maintain our scholarship value and the ability to stay eligible. But we also had practice pretty much all day long,
right?
Weightlifting, conditioning, training table, nutritionists, travel, all of this stuff. On top of that, I speak again, as you know, from a basketball perspective. Our season basically runs the whole school year. So I, in 5 years, had no Thanksgiving break. I didn't get to eat Thanksgiving dinner with my family 1 year. We never had Christmas break. I think we had a day, maybe two off over Christmas. If we were lucky, 48 hours. No spring breaks, which is the most heartbreaking to me. I never got Cancun. I never got Daytona. Come on. That's terrible. It's tragic for a 19-year-old.
It is.
And honestly, we never really got summers off either. A lot of, again, this varies between, a revenue generating sport like football and basketball at a major school versus, maybe track and field or something like that is a little more seasonal. All summer, we were basically on campus working out.
Were you doing that kind of like the 3-year plan? It seems like a lot of players now are on that kind of 3-year plan where you're there every summer so you can graduate in 3 years essentially if you want to. Or are they doing that yet? There's a small percentage of players and athletes that I think do that. Yeah.
A lot of times what they're trying to do is maybe graduate in 3 years, if possible, maybe even get a year or two of grad school paid for.
Right.
Which, if you can do it, is brilliant. But again, with the time commitment, at least that I'm familiar with playing basketball at Michigan State, there's no chance. I mean, I went 5
even
years
less life. Right. Yeah. It's even less life than you've already described. You're like, I want to be like the academic guy and add all this on my plate. Yeah. The difference though between the academic guy and what you're describing is that there aren't 20,000 people showing up to pay tickets to, watch the academic guy, take a test. So it's just
true. Yeah.
And there's no jersey sales. There's no TV deals. There's, that just seems like, so I think that's where everyone gets to the point where you're like, yeah, these guys should be getting a piece of that. Cause you see the coaches' salaries too, that have just absolutely ballooned. I mean, the college coaches now are most of the time the highest paid person in some of these states even. It's kind of incredible when you see like the amounts that the governor makes, and then you see the Alabama football coach and he's at like $10 million or $12 million a year. And you're like, holy cow, who runs the state, right?
Yeah. Well, you make a good point. My friend actually became a doctor. So the pressure that he has now being a doctor and helping people and saving lives is much greater than playing in front of 20,000 folks or whatever it may be. Not at the time. It was obviously a big difference. Now we flip-flopped. I have little pressure on me. The other two other points though to that kind of lead into kind of building the foundation of my perspective is two things. So one, with all of that time commitment going to both academics and athletics, we didn't have the ability to really hold any sort of part-time job. And so, folks say, hey, you got a scholarship, you got room and board, but what about spending money? What if I wanted to take some friends out and go out to dinner? What if we wanted to go out to the bar one night? What if I wanted to, grab some new clothes for the summer? Like a lot of times that's coming either from money you may have saved up before you got to college, or if you come from a family that has the means, maybe from your mom and dad giving you a little bit of spending cash here and there. So that's one part of it. You start to look then at some of my teammates, I've mentioned this on previous chats, coming from, lower income areas, inner cities, they didn't have that. They didn't have the means for their parents or their families or whatever it might be to provide that money to them. And so that's where you start to hear some of these athletes who come from rougher upbringings saying, hey, listen, I didn't have enough money to get food at night. The cafeteria was closed. I didn't have any money to go over to, wherever it might be and pick up a little snack. You don't have any money in your pocket. And that's not them groveling. That's not them complaining. Yeah, it's great they got a scholarship. It's great they get to play on TV. It's great they get free, athletic gear and whatnot. But at the same time, there's some human decency that goes into it too. And I saw it firsthand. Like if I didn't play sports, if I didn't have friends in the game playing, these big revenue generating sports, I would probably kind of scoff and say,
right,
oh, these guys are just complaining. They're big babies. They get all this great benefits. But I actually saw these guys like call me up and say, hey, can I borrow some cash? I want to go grab a pizza. And you're like, that's terrible, man, because these guys are doing so much for the university. And then we can dig into those pieces. The last part, though, the difference between an academic scholarship and an athletic scholarship and a normal student and an athlete is kind of the toll that's taken on your body too, right? Like I'm 39 years old now, and I have ongoing issues physically that I can absolutely directly tie to my days playing basketball. I've got a very bad back. I've had 6 knee surgeries on my right knee alone. All of those sprung from basketball injuries. And again, would those injuries have come into play? I love playing basketball. I'm not complaining, but there's a lot of ongoing issues that were originated during your time playing highly competitive basketball. A lot of times playing in college, guys who maybe don't play overseas or play afterwards, they're still having issues. A lot of my buddies are having issues now as we get a little bit older. And, it's too late at this point. We take care of these things on our own, and it's kind of like you're forgotten about. And that, again, this is not a woe is me comment, but
no. That's just
a lot of this
reality.
stuff stems from that time there. Yeah. And there's no, medical benefit that flows beyond, the 4 or 5 years is you're kind of chewed up and spit out, and whatever happens to you after that, you kind of take care on your own, which again is fine. That's what we all have done. That's what we do. That's what we probably will do. But that leads to that conversation. Could there be more done? Could there be, medical support? Could there be financial support? Things like that. And we can again branch off into any of those. There's lots of different ways we can go from here.
Yeah, and that's basketball too. I mean, you're not even talking about football and head injuries and all kinds of other stuff that could stem from playing major football. You said two things in there too that I think was interesting. I remember, I think it was the Fab Five documentary where they talk about Weber walking by his jersey and thinking like it's $70 and he couldn't even afford a slice of pizza. I think that might have been the same analogy. And I think the other thing, when you talked about not being able to get a job, that really hit me too, in thinking that, a lot of people, they're not just there to get an education. They've got a family at home. You hear about this a lot during the pandemic where, kids are out getting jobs so that they can help out at home. And these guys, they're not just able to not provide for themselves in that way or ask for money from home, but a lot of times they might be needed in some ways to help out at home too, and they can't do that either. So it's almost like a double burden where they're doing this thing that they love to do, but it's not providing for them, it's not providing for their family. And you can imagine just the pressure that you could feel. I think as a man, an older man now, you really think about that and what that feels like to have the burden to provide for a family or help out with a family. And these guys are sometimes feeling at 18 or 19 years old, and it's tough. That's a lot of pressure too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you took it a step further. It's not just that they don't necessarily have the ability to get any sort of financial support from their family, but they might even need to provide that support back to their family, and they're taken away from that. And that's why a lot of these guys are like, listen, it's NBA or bust, it's NFL or bust. Like that's the only way I'm going to kind of make it is to be able to do something like that, to be able to pay back my family, help my mom, help my brothers and sisters, whatever it might be.
All right,
that adds an even bigger layer of pressure onto those guys as well.
No kidding. All right, let's get into a few ideas. So I went through and looked at some articles, and I'm curious, and I don't know where we want to go. I think the healthcare one though is an interesting one. So we can start there since you brought it up. What would that look like? Would that be part of like something that you could buy into, like the university's healthcare system, or how would you imagine that as part of the athlete's package? Because some of these things, I think, without dismantling the whole system, you could maybe add on some things that could make it more, to more fairly compensate them. So you're not completely going out to pay them, but that you're just adding things to benefit the athletes for the things that they're contributing to the university and that they may have to live with for the rest of their lives, like you are.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start because that's an important one. Like I said, a lot of folks who play sports, and again, I'm very basketball centric at a big university, but I mean, this goes for, folks that play tennis who hurt their shoulders or have tennis elbow, right? Like they have just as many problems walking away from the game once they're done as well. So this is not just centric to one sport or centric to one, type of revenue generation or type of university. So I think this is something that can go across, athletic programs. There's a couple of things that I've heard about or discussed. One is just an extension of medical help. So, obviously when you're at a big university or really any university is going to have great access to doctors, nutritionists, masseuses, all of these wonderful things. And you're showered with them, for the 4 or 5 years that you're there, right? It's if you have a problem, you've got personal rehab and all of these amazing things that are going on, in your back pocket, which is fantastic. And again, the minute you graduate, it's all gone, whether those, injuries have completely been healed or not, whether they're nagging, whether they're ongoing, whatever it might be. So if there's any way to potentially expand or extend that help for, 2 or 3 years, 4 years, 5, 10 years, whatever it might be, some sort of window where, you could potentially tap back in to get some help for maybe existing conditions when you leave. That could be nice, right?
Yeah.
I think the health insurance one is maybe the most likely one where if you're an athlete for a university, regardless of what sport it is, you can buy into that university's health insurance, right? And there you then have access to that same group of doctors and assistants, and they know what you've been through. And you could, say I could be 39 years old and still be, instead of being, I work at Google now, instead of being on Google's, Blue Cross Blue Shield insurance, I could still be on Michigan State's insurance. And maybe I could get that at a lower cost, right? Because of all of the revenue that was generated for the university through my time there, through the scholarship, all of that stuff. So some sort of health insurance that can be either privately or personally bought into, or again, you start getting into paying players. Maybe instead of paying up players, $10,000 a season or $20,000 a season, you pay them half that and put half that into a stipend that goes towards ongoing health insurance for the next 10, 15 years, whatever it might be. So you can find some creative ways to do that. But I think the health part and the medical part is a real cornerstone of what needs to be done for a lot of these athletes.
Yeah, I like that. So this was kind of an add-on to that. What do you think about more years? So we talked about like finishing early and trying to get grad school in. Is there something in the universities, because that's it's keeping with like the core principles where they're saying, well, these are student athletes. What about having an opportunity to access the education at the school for 8 years? So you wouldn't, it's not like giving you multiple degrees, but it's so hard to, you could space out the time that you finish your degree or do, you could do 2 degrees, but just a way to take some of that pressure off to be more of a college athlete and enjoy the time there. And you get, potentially longer to finish, but also could finish 2 or however you want to. It's just a way to give while keeping it in-house, I guess.
Yeah, that's an interesting one too. I've certainly heard of this. Kind of the perspective that I've heard and discussed on this is if you have, the opportunity to get a scholarship or to play for a university, any sort of sport, not only does that scholarship cover your undergrad, but it also gives you the opportunity to attend that university for grad school as well, right? So now you're not just walking away with, these days, it's getting more and more common, a somewhat common undergrad degree, but you also then have a more valuable graduate degree, right? And whether that's, some folks will do the graduate degree immediately after school. Yeah. Maybe it's 10 years or 15 years down the road. I got my MBA probably 15 years after I graduated from Michigan State. Now, I didn't go to Michigan State, but let's say I did, I could go back to Michigan State.
If it was out there for free, you probably would have.
Well, if it was, absolutely. I'm going to. But you have a lot of universities, you have a lot of businesses and companies who are providing this for
That's true.
for employees to go back. It seems like it makes sense for the
Not
university
in
to want these
education.
athletes to come back as well. Yeah. Well, yeah. But let's say I had the ability to go back to Michigan State for free. And again, maybe I still have to apply and meet, certain regulations, just like another student might. But if I do, then I'm admitted back. I can do grad school. And now that scholarship has a little added value at, honestly, not a whole lot of, commitment or financial stress to the university by letting, a handful of student athletes come back and get their graduate degree. And now look at this. Now you've got these athletes who committed all this time and effort to the university, and they're walking away not just with an undergrad degree, but a graduate degree, and they're going out and representing the university even better now. They have the ability to make more money as a grad student, somebody who is a graduated grad student. There's lots of different benefits that can be placed there. Now, it gets even stronger when you combine the two things together. You do something with some sort of health insurance or some sort of ongoing medical help, plus the ability for students to come back and finish school in a certain amount of time, or potentially do a graduate school under that scholarship as well. Now you're starting to see a really nice package that has gone above and beyond what exists today without having to cut checks to athletes for their likeness and things like that, which we can also talk about. But you're starting to look at some creative ways to do things that seem to make a lot of sense, both for the student athletes and for the universities as well.
All right. Well, you brought it up, so let's get into that, because this is sort of what, like, I view this as the tear it down model, because I don't know even what to compare it to. I know someone talked about like iTunes, which is like this is kind of a random analogy for a basketball podcast, but so this is like a legacy product for Apple, and they built it to work on Microsoft and all these different platforms. And so the reason that it's hard to rebuild it is because they've got all these crazy things built into it, and you really almost have to just tear it completely apart or just build a new one, right? If they want to do some of the major things to it. And it just seems like with paying college players, like you said, once you start to pull at this system, it was set up for to do one specific thing. And even though it's generating all this revenue, the way that it's funneled is such a specific way that if you start to change the structure of how you distribute it, it just becomes mind bending. Like you said, like, if you start paying the college football players, well, why are they giving money to all the other sports then? It seems like all of it should go to college football, right? Or football players. And same thing with basketball. Well, then what happens to the other sports? Who pays for them? Did they lose their scholarships? Does the sport go away? Like, what do they get? Academic scholarships? I just think as soon as you flip it on its head and say, here's money, here's this pool of money, and try to figure out how to distribute it, you just open Pandora's box to just a whole host of problems that I don't think that the universities are prepared to deal with, or frankly want to deal with.
Yeah, I mean that's the crux, right? That's the toughest piece, and probably why we saved it till last. Is I think there needs to be an overhaul of the scholarship program. I think it's as simple as that, right? Yeah, I'm joking. It's not simple. It's very complicated. But what I don't like is some of the things that are being proposed right now. Like you're hearing, there's movement towards paying players for their likenesses, so players can make money off their likeness. I think that's really dangerous because you have a handful of schools who are going to benefit from that. If I'm the top recruit in the country, or let's say a top 200 recruit in the country, and I can go to Michigan State and my likeness will earn me $50,000 a year by selling some jerseys and some bobbleheads or something like that. I don't know.
Cowboy hats.
Cowboy hats. There we go. An homage to the nickname. Or I could go to maybe like a MAC school. Maybe I could go to Toledo in Ohio, which is where I'm from. And, maybe I could make $5,000 a year at Toledo. Now it's starting to make an unfair advantage for certain schools in bigger areas, or, even within the same conference system, right? Like, would I rather go to, like a Penn State that's kind of in the middle of nowhere? I love Penn State. Don't get me wrong. If anyone's listening, Happy Valley is one of my favorite college towns. But I'm saying it's kind of in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania. Or do I want to go to, University of Michigan that has this huge, group of donors right there in that area, has a huge fan base, sells so much darn apparel you can't even kind of wrap your head around it. That might sway me. Instead of going to Penn State, which is a great football program, maybe I'm going to go to University of Michigan because I can make more money. And that's going to start to tip the competitive scales from a recruiting standpoint, from a competitive standpoint. I think the likeness compensation is a really dangerous one. And then it just opens up a lot of, kind of dirty practices too. Our company's going to get in and try and make money off of players' likenesses and pay them a little bit and take a cut. And I don't know. It seems like there's a lot of shady stuff that could happen with that. So
yeah, I think of the two models I've got that we can kind of focus in on are this kind of Olympic model, which maybe not, maybe is synonymous with a little bit of dirt on the side, which is like endorsements, selling their likeness, or like royalties, sort of like the music industry. Again, not maybe a model that they want to follow, or just more of a free market where the university is actually just using the money to create a salary cap or just paying the players from that pool of money that they generate from the TV. I just don't know though. It still seems like there's inequity there, right? Because some places just have, the Big Ten's got its own TV network, and they just generate so much more revenue than some of these other places. I just think that they're going to, or you think about football even more, like the SEC. I mean, they were just like with the COVID stuff, they're like, we're just going to play. We could just play on our own, and they could almost be their own league. They don't necessarily even need any of the other conferences, right?
Yeah, I would lean towards kind of what you were talking about on the latter. I think the former, in terms of like the Olympic model, is more akin to what I mentioned, kind of like the profiting off of likeness, right? If you're going to go into town and do a local car dealership commercial, and then you get paid for it, or you get to drive a Escalade around for the rest of the season. I mean, that would be awesome for a lot of these players, but at the same time, that could unevenly sway.
That's kind of what you did in Europe, right? They just put a bunch of stickers on it for you.
Put the big Michigan State Spartan sticker on
That's
the side.
right.
Hey, come on. I would gladly drive that around when I was 18, 19.
That's
I'd
right.
drive it around now. To be honest with you.
Exactly.
So I think for me, that's a tough one because it falls more in that profiting off the likeness side of things.
Yeah.
Now,
is that any worse than the like under the table stuff that's happening right now? Like the, bags of cash and agents or whatever is going on right now?
Well, so you segued me right into what I was just going to say. I'll talk about what I think the ultimate, again, in my very humble opinion is, but what you led me into was what I was just about to mention is I think the NCAA has done this to themselves over years of not adjusting. They're basically like, you get a scholarship, go play your sport, be quiet, be grateful. And what that has led to is these situations where, we talked about this earlier. Some of these athletes that are coming, student athletes that are coming from, lower income areas, inner city areas who can't necessarily get that spending cash, or they don't have money to go out. You think somebody approaches them and says, hey, take a free pizza from this little local pizza company, or here's, a donor comes and said, hey, here's $1,000 in cash. No one will ever know you took it. Of course, they're going to probably say yes, right? Because they don't have the ability to make money on their own, or necessarily that scholarship doesn't cover enough where they wouldn't be enticed to do that. And if the NCAA had adjusted their scholarship program 20, 30 years ago to adjust with the times and the increasing revenue, the scholarship has basically been the same. I think I mentioned this before. My dad played at Ohio State in the 60s. His scholarship was basically the same scholarship in 1968 that my scholarship was in 1999. Jeez. The same thing. It didn't change. It covered the same stuff: room, board, books, whatever. Yeah. It didn't change. Although everything else in the sport changed. Ticket prices, corporate sponsorships, box seats, courtside seats for $2,000-$3,000 a game. I grew up watching Ohio State football with my parents. They had season tickets. I mean, we used to have great season tickets. We were at the top of the stadium by the time they gave up their season tickets because we couldn't afford them. Our season tickets were going for $50,000, $100,000 a seat. You have all of this money flowing in. you have these big TV deals, but the scholarship stayed the exact same. So I think that led to a lot of these players saying, hey, we want to get paid for our likeness. We want to get paid for our jersey sales. Whereas if they were compensated through that scholarship a little bit more appropriately, I don't think that the student athletes would have been upset about a lot of the stuff. And you may not have seen some of these lawsuits that came out. You may not have seen some of these things that were happening where players are talking about, being paid and all of these things and being back paid for certain times as well. So that leads me to ultimately what I think is probably the best option is just, like you said, a tear it down and a rebuild of the scholarship program where the scholarship covers room, board, books, etc. But there's also some sort of stipend for spending money, right? And either that goes into a fund that they have immediate access to, or maybe 50% goes into a fund that they have immediate access to. Maybe it's $1,000 cash a month that they can spend on food, clothes, whatever else it is that they need to do. Maybe that's too much. I don't know. Maybe it's $500 a month, and then another $500 goes into
hold on.
some sort of fund that can be spent afterwards.
So with that though, do you keep it kind of the egalitarian model where you're doing the same for everybody? The first guy, the number one, a 5-star recruit, Imani Bates coming into Michigan State, maybe, or and whoever at the end of the bench, right? Is it the same for them?
I think you have to. And that's tough, right? I think you have to keep it the same for player 1 through player 15 on a hoop squad, player 1 through player 100 on a football squad, and also player 1 through 15 on a women's volleyball squad or whatever it might be. I think you have to keep it equal across the board.
So you would propose to still kind of share that same revenue pool too with the other sports.
Yeah, exactly. So I think this has to be funded from all of the universities. So every conference, part of it, whether it's 1% of their profits or whatever it might be, from any sports, has to go into this some sort of pool, right? Again, I'm not a financial analyst.
No, I know. This is what I'm.
Built this out, but this could work, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing in theory that's telling me or in logic that's telling me this wouldn't work. But so Alabama football might have to pay $30 million into this fund. That might be 1% of their profits. I don't know.
Probably
a small max.
maybe less.
Yeah, exactly. So I think there's ways that you could think about this where you could take money that's coming in from revenue generating sports and disperse it out evenly to overhaul that scholarship program, because there's money going into the scholarship program already. Where is that coming from? Right. A lot of it's coming from sport already in athletics. That's where a lot of that's funded from, or donors or whatever.
Well, it just seems like too it would be more. I mean, there's just such a weird arms race with facilities that has happened where it's just I feel like the college sports have nicer facilities than a lot of the pro sports now because you can't pay the players, so it's just all the donors want their name on, want influence some way, so they're building these insane. The locker rooms and I don't even know. It just is. It's out of control with how crazy it is. Cook Hall at IU. I remember seeing that right when I was in grad school. I'm like, this is unbelievable. What? It's just like a palace. It's neat, but it's also like you said. It just seems like if I couldn't get a slice of pizza, you just start to feel a little weird about everything.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. I can attest. I've been in many pro facilities, pro MBA facilities, and I've been in many college facilities. A lot of times, the college facilities are nicer. Michigan State's got some of the best, right? It's absolutely beautiful there. Yeah. Could you, instead of building a $100 million sports facility, maybe build a $75 million sports facility and take that $25 million and put it towards the student athletes? Doesn't that seem like it's possible at the very least? It seems like, and you multiply that times the 120 or whatever, 150 some Division I colleges. I can't remember what it is, but now you've got a pretty decent pool of money that can be refreshed and whatever. And again, that can be dispersed out. And really, again, I'm not saying it has to be a huge amount, but if you could just rethink the way this scholarship works on top of, now let's put all these together. So you rethink the scholarship with a little extra money that can allow the student athletes to be a little bit more normal, to be able to do some things socially, to be able to do some things that allows them to maybe not want to take money under the table or do things or scurry out of college as quickly as possible or skip college altogether, which we're seeing a lot now as well.
Yeah,
especially in the basketball world.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you do that. You overhaul the scholarship program with some sort of funding, some sort of pooled funding. You maybe allow the universities to extend that scholarship to allow for maybe like grad classes to be covered or something like that, or a longer period of time if student athletes want to come back and get their degree at a later time, something like that. And then maybe that, some sort of addition of medical help or health insurance on top of that. That seems like it would probably hit all of the boxes that a lot of student athletes are concerned about without some sort of like crazy, Joe Burrow last year is getting paid, $600,000 for his likeness and his teammates are getting nothing. And it just creates this really strange kind of caste system within the sport as well. So that's what you want to avoid. So is there a fair way to do it? It might not be perfect in all cylinders, but it does solve for some of the problems that a lot of
I'm curious what so you mentioned like caste. Do you feel like that part of what college is like, is that in your mind kind of what you undermined is kind of what college athletics are about, is that egalitarian kind of situation where you're all in it together, and now if somebody's getting paid a certain amount, you lose something, you lose something there in the process.
Yeah, I can't imagine that wouldn't happen. If you're rolling up to the Breslin Center in East Lansing and you're, my first car was a 93 Ford Probe, which I don't think I could fit into. I don't know how I fit into it at the time. I thought it was a pretty sweet ride, but it was not the coolest. So if I'm rolling up in my 93 maroon red Ford Probe and then, Mateen Cleaves, the superstar of the team's rolling up in a Bentley or an Escalade or something like that, would that cause a problem? I don't know. Yeah, you start to multiply that across teams and sports and athletes and things like that. That could certainly cause a problem amongst your own team, but also amongst, other programs as well, right? If you've got the women's field hockey team practicing across the street and all the basketball and football players are rolling up in brand new cars, that doesn't feel fair to them as well, right? There's a inequality that's starting to take place. And again, that's where the challenge lies. That's why I hate this conversation. I love it, but I hate it because I feel like the only way to make it work is to make it as absolute equal as possible. Across teams, across sports, across universities, and that's what also causes the big challenge as well. Yeah.
Well, let's end on the free market. So let's just go think really what would it look like? Because when I think about this, what I imagine is like teams that are associated with the university but no longer are directly linked to it. So I don't know if the European model is a perfect analogy to that, where they've got kind of the club teams that are like FC Barcelona, and they have these like Ricky Rubio or Luka Doncic plays on these teams that are associated with the bigger clubs and then can get moved up if they're good enough. So you'd maybe be like still the Michigan State Spartans, but the guys would no longer necessarily go directly to the university. Now they're decoupled from the university in that they are paid out of this separate kind of fund, not necessarily the athletic department of the university. Now it's this sort of different organization. You could still affiliate with the university in some way. Like maybe you could choose to get a scholarship instead of paid, but they would pay the players directly out of that sport. And then other sports wouldn't tap into that, and wouldn't be able to tap into that revenue that they generate. So you're just decoupling it altogether. The top players could make what they're worth, you could argue. The guys that are going directly to the D League are getting six figures from the D League, and they're not going to get nearly as many eyeballs as they would have if they had gone to a college. So it just is strange because the money is clearly out there for these top level guys, even maybe a closer relationship with the NBA because they're developing these guys for the NBA, the top ones. And I just think if you go that radical where you're opening up a free market, you almost have to divorce it from the university in some way.
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about is kind of the privatization of
Right.
college sports, right?
Yes. Yeah. That's another way to say it, for sure.
Well, my opinion is that I would hate to see that happen.
Well, why? What?
Also,
but what do you? I guess, what do you imagine losing? Because again, some of the things some of the issues that you brought up are solved by this, because you're able to pay the guys sort of what they're worth. So maybe you could still have some students or some people getting a scholarship or something like that through the university, but the guys who are generating the majority of the income, I mean, it works for the coaches, right? These guys are getting millions of dollars.
Yeah, it's a good question. I just, for me, I'm just a purist. I love college sports so much. I love kind of the simplicity and the innocence, and I love the fact that, you know, all things stripped away that we previously talked about.
Yeah.
You know, all of these student athletes, all these guys and girls are there for the passion, right? They just absolutely love the sports that they're playing. And, you know, no one's like, oh, I got to keep playing the sport for a scholarship. Like, a scholarship is nice. And it's fantastic. And it's a great added benefit. But, you know, 99% of the people are there because they just absolutely love the sport that they're playing, right? There's a lot of non-scholarship sports where people are dedicating their time and their free time and all of their effort and energy and bodies and things like that to not even get a scholarship. You've got walk-ons who just want to be a part of the team and be a part of that experience. It takes, I think, a lot of that away. And that's what I absolutely love so much about college sports is that cross between innocence and passion, and I'd like to see it stay right there, because if you start moving too close to professional sports at the college level, you start to get some of the bads of professional sports, right?
How close is it now, though? You know, I mean, like, some of the stuff that you're saying, I feel like is already afoot, and I wonder, I wonder if, like, you know, if you did this, it wouldn't work. I think there's actually like 300 Division I schools, so I don't think.
I was way off.
Yeah,
sorry.
I don't know. It's all right. I mean, who knows?
Thanks for the fact check.
No, that helps, because it's like it kind of shows exactly what we're talking about. Is that these like teams that would be quote unquote professional, I mean, it still wouldn't encompass most of the Division I, right? They just don't make enough to set up something like this. But it would be more for the super leagues that have been created, the Big Ten, the SEC, all the huge conferences that are making just crazy amounts of money. And then you would maybe have a second tier of Division I schools, or maybe they would become Division II, or however you'd want to label it, where it'd still kind of follow the older model.
Yeah. So your initial question, where does college sports sit? I think it, you know, obviously it's between high school and pro. Mm-hmm. I would definitely say it's closer to pro, because you still have players that are playing for the passion and for the love of the game, but you have huge ticket prices, right? Right. You've got the corporate boxes, you've got huge budgets, hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars of income. So yeah, when it comes to that, if you're trying to tie that closer to professional sports or high school sports, it's not even close. It's definitely closer to pro sports. But I still think that there's that amateur aspect of the student athlete that I just love so much. And maybe that's just me. I would find that hard to let go, to turn it into some sort of professional league. That said, I mean, you might be onto something here, because what's already happening and what potentially could happen is, if there's not some sort of overhaul of the system, you're seeing guys that are skipping. They're going straight to the D League. You see guys that are skipping, again, very basketball centric, but you see guys skipping college, going down and playing in the Australian Basketball League, which is a great league. You see guys going overseas. And so maybe that's the corrective solution. Like, if the NCAA doesn't want to change and you know, can't figure out a system for paying players, maybe those players just skip college altogether. they go somewhere else, and college keeps its sacred kind of amateur status. Players aren't paid. Maybe there's some sort of, that trifecta we talked about of a scholarship overhaul, more, allowance for, getting a more advanced degree and some sort of ongoing medical help. And then other players go into the G League, go into, overseas basketball, and that's where they make their money. And then they hop to the NBA if they're able to. Maybe that's the most likely logical solution.
Yeah, it seems like that's the way it's going. I just feel like, I guess my reason for coming up with, or I don't even know if I didn't come up with it, but hearing about it and talking about it now is that it gets me back towards what college was when you were there. Like, more guys stayed. There were more these cohesive teams that you followed, and even if it's only for 4 years, it creates this different dynamic because I associate with that school as a student that went to IU, just as that opportunity to align myself with those guys for a longer period of time, and for them to be compensated for the money that they are bringing into the university and to the athletic program, that they're doing. It just, I just don't know. I know what you're saying though. It does change something too. There's just that difference that happens, but I don't know how to weigh it out. I think that's, again, when people say just pay the athletes, like, this is why it's so hard, because when you end up doing that, it does fundamentally change things in a way. Even like getting paid under the table, it's like the difference between Barry Bonds and knowing that he was thinking that he was on steroids to knowing he was on steroids, right? Like, it's not that much different. If I looked at the size of his head and how much it grew, in the back of my mind, I should have known that, but it's still different knowing that he does. And I think that it would. You're right. I think that's kind of where I fall to ultimately, is that if you do start paying them, it might be the right choice, and it probably was the right choice for some of those guys in baseball to do that, because everyone was doing it and it generated tons of revenue and all kinds of people watched baseball. But in the end, you have to weigh it against, like, what's the long term? Like, do you want this? Are you ready for this fundamental shift? And something that you can't. I don't think you can go back either. I think once you open that line, like, that's it, right? It's not going back to scholarships then. So you have to be. I think that's what makes them drag their feet so much too, is that this is it. Like, you have to pick, and if you go one way, you can't go back.
All right, I got it. A final solution. Don't change anything. Yes. Just let all these athletes get paid under the table. That's our solution. Turn a blind eye. Keep the scholarships like they are. Don't pay players. Let them get paid under the table. Everyone will be happy.
Get rid of the rule where they have to get in trouble. Leave me with my college sports and my imagination.
No, honestly, Aaron, this is why it's such a tough conversation, because I honestly, I think all of these ideas are both good and bad. Even the ideas that I bring to the table, I don't feel super confident in, because, again, I'm not an analyst. I'm not a theorist. I'm not an entrepreneur when it comes to this type of stuff. It's hard for me to really sink my teeth into whether this would work or not. From an ideological standpoint, I certainly think a lot of this would pass the kind of sniff test where, that should work, right? It could, at least. And I think the ideas you've brought, the ideas I brought, I think they all do, and I think they're all good. But when you actually start putting pen to paper and figuring out how to do it across, now that you've corrected me, I was way off, 300 plus universities in Division I. And then, women's versus men's sports, revenue generating versus, it's these ideas are good in theory. I think any of them could make a lot of sense, but how do you actually roll this out in a way that makes sense? I think that's where you have to start to pull back to a more conservative approach. Something needs to be done. We all agree at that. Most people agree on that, I guess we'll say. But I think anything that seems a bit too far one way or the other, full out paying for likeness or sponsorships or things like that, it just seems like it could be really difficult to do and could throw kind of the sanctity of college sports off kilter a little too much. So maybe pulling things back, something that's a little bit more conservative in approach, but still changes the ecosystem, is maybe something that's maybe most likely to come out.
Well, man, I so appreciate your time tonight. And here's what you got to do. since you're working at Google, so you're going to let people at Google listen to this and get them on figuring this out, because I think that something's got to happen, and I want my college sports, because I love watching them, and I want it to be preserved and the players to be compensated. I think we threw out some ideas, but someone's got to figure out how to do it. There's got to be a Silicon Valley solution for this, right?
That's a great idea. I typically say nearly everyone that works at Google is smarter than I am, so I can tap into my network.
Boom.
Of incredibly smart folks.
See, and you're smarter than me, so that's exactly what I'm doing.
All right, next meeting, Aaron, I'm going to bring it up to my team. We'll see if we can come up with some ideas.
I love it. All right, man. Thanks so much.
Always a great time.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the 99 podcast with HVS, the High Volume Shooters. For more information, check out the blog at 99.com under HVS. And while you're there, do yourself a favor and pick up some retro college shorts. Till next time.